Our scripture today is James 5, verses 7 to 10. Therefore, brothers and sisters, you must be patient as you wait for the coming of the Lord. Consider the farmer who waits patiently for the coming of rain in the fall and spring, looking forward to the precious fruit of the earth. You must also wait patiently, strengthening your resolve, because the coming of the Lord is near. Don't complain about each other, brothers and sisters, so that you won't be judged. Look, the judge is standing by the door. Brothers and sisters, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of patient resolve and steadfastness.
Thank you, Lois. So, ready or not, Christmas is a little bit closer. A little closer every day. Week by week, we are getting there. Advent is, of course, a time of waiting. Some of us are more eagerly waiting than others. Some of us are more ready than others. I was explaining to the kids this week the connection. We were talking about the sun and how easily and how early it gets dark. According to the internet, the sun will set at 4:30 p.m. today, which feels very strange. But we are coming to a time when the sun will be coming up earlier than the day before. As we get closer to the end of December, we're coming to the point where the seasons start to get, or the days start to get a little bit longer. The sun will set a little bit later, and the sun will rise earlier. And so I was explaining to them the historic connection. There are many cultures in the history of the world have had big celebrations around the winter solstice. And as the church was getting started, these early Christians were starting to ask themselves, we live in this culture that has a big celebration around the solstice, but it's a celebration of the god Saturn. And we can't celebrate other gods. But they got down, they kind of analyzed this holiday and looked at what it was they were celebrating. Well, at Saturnalia, they were celebrating the arrival of the sun. Because now the sun is going to make our days longer and brighter and warmer, eventually. And so they said, well, we have a way in our stories of Jesus to think about the arrival of the sun. And so we celebrate the birth of Jesus very close to the time when the sun is starting to make the days longer. This is not an accidental coincidence. This is very intentional. So we are waiting as we wake up in the morning and we're not sure if our car will start, as we scrape snow off of our windows and push it off of our driveways. We're eagerly awaiting for the days where it will be warmer, where the days will be longer, where we can wake up with the sun, where we can go to bed having enjoyed a full day of sunlight. That time is not here yet, but it is coming. We experience Christmas, we experience Advent as a time of waiting commercially sometimes. Because we have packages that are on their way, and when we see the person delivering the mail, then we wonder, well, is today the day? We are waiting. As family gatherings come, we are waiting for those people to arrive. Our students are starting to, and some have already begun to write their exams for the end of the semester. They're waiting for these exams, these big academic burdens to be lifted off of their shoulders. They are waiting. We are all waiting. So in the passage that Lois read for us, we're encouraged as we think about waiting to wait, to consider the farmer. Sorry, Ryan. Yeah, just right there. Perfect. To consider the farmer. Farming metaphors are very helpful to many of us. We can look out the windows of this very building and consider the farmers as they are preparing, as they're eagerly waiting. So, when we look outside now, we see nothing. We don't see what the farmers are doing, but many of us know what the farmers are doing. Finally, now the farmers can tend to their machinery that had been breaking down all through the year. The farmers now will be preparing and ordering the seeds of the crops that they will be planting in the spring. The farmers now will be crunching all of the numbers now that the crops have been sold and the bills have to be paid, and wondering if they have enough for the tax man. The farmers are still doing things. And if they have animals, they've always been doing things, and that is uninterrupted by the arrival of spring. But the farmers don't just sit idly by. The farmers are waiting for the arrival of spring with anticipation, but they're paying attention. If we go back to biblical times, they didn't have to worry about machinery, and they didn't have to worry about seed catalogs and complicated mechanical things, but they were still paying attention. They were watching the clouds in the skies. They were watching the soil. They were watching the animals who would give off signs of what the season was going to look like. They were preparing. I saw somewhere a little while ago that said, success is when preparation meets opportunity. Farmers understand that well. There is an opportunity with the coming season, and there is preparation that is required. So those rhythms happen naturally in the world around us, and some of us require some of those natural rhythms to pull us into our own preparations for our own lives. But James here is talking about, as he says, as we wait for the coming of the Lord. And there's an event in some ways that we think about when James is talking about this, as we wait for Jesus to come back and rescue us. Now the audience of his writing, the first audience, they waited patiently, and that coming didn't happen. Nearly 2,000 years have passed, and that coming has not happened. We continue to wait for that arrival, but at the same time, there are other things that we can wait for, even in solidarity with the first audience of this writing. So James wrote this at a time where it wasn't easy or popular or safe to be part of the church. The Roman government at that time understood the Christian church to be a nuisance. A group of people who ran around without respecting proper hierarchies of leadership, who didn't value the gods of the Roman pantheon, and who didn't really care about what the stability of the Roman government needed to be. These people were going around talking about a different Son of God, going around talking about a different Prince of Peace. And the Romans thought they kind of had the corner on that market. So they had made it difficult. They were arresting Christians, arresting Christian leaders. And so the people, as they gathered and worshipped, there was always fear of punishment, fear of arrest. And so when James writes these words, this is also on their minds. As you anticipate the coming of the Lord, the arrival of a time where we can gather safely. Those two things, I think would have been connected in their minds. But then, in the next couple of verses, we see James encourages the church to consider the prophets of old. He says, hey, listen, we're waiting. Jesus said he was coming back. We're waiting for that. Jesus said that he would come back to rescue us. We're ready. We're hoping. We're holding on to that. But if you look back in the history of the people of God, the prophets were eagerly waiting God to step in and intervene. There were prophets who stepped in to say, hey, we as people of Israel need to get our stuff together, and we have to clean up our lives and be ready for God to rescue us. And there were prophets who said, hey, we've messed up for too long, we're going to be punished, so we better hold on. Hold on for whatever invasions are coming. And those prophets stuck their necks out because they were not received well most of the time by their own people. But they waited. They waited with anticipation for God's promises to be fulfilled. So when James is talking to the early church, he's reminding them of the stories of their own prophets, things that they were supposed to be learning about. Those prophets suffered. The early church suffered under the weight of both the Jewish oppression, but also the Roman oppression of who the church was going to be. So when we think about our journeys, there are people here among us who are suffering and are eagerly awaiting the end of the suffering. It might be a difficult family situation, financial situation, health situation. We're carrying these burdens and we're eagerly waiting for a time when those burdens will be lifted. And at the same time, we continue to hope and wait for Jesus to come back. James mentions in verse 11, just one verse after what Lois read for us, James mentions the book of Job. And Job is one of the easiest examples to refer back to when we think about suffering. So let's think about Job. It's not one of the suggested readings for today, but it's mentioned. We can think about that story. So Job was a good man, not just a good man, one of the best men. And we have this weird introduction, weird because we can't really wrap our minds around it. And I think it's written that way because Job also would not have been able to wrap his mind around what was happening behind the scenes. So in this introduction, we find God and Satan have this weird interaction where Satan has been roaming the earth looking for people to mess with, and God suggests to Satan, hey, have you thought about my servant Job? And Satan says, well, yeah, what about him? Sure, he's a good guy, but it's because you've made his life so easy. It's easy to be good when you have a healthy family, when you have lots of money, when you have lots of livestock that are healthy and reproducing. Well, yeah, of course he's good. But if you take that away, you won't call him your good servant. Now, Job is going about his life. Job is a family man. He's a good farmer. He's a person of faith. All of these things are a regular part of Job's life. He has no idea in the story of what is happening behind the scenes. And as Job is going about his life, everything changes. His children die. His crops fail. His animals die and are stolen. His health is gone. And he's left sitting in pain, in agony, and he doesn't know what's going on. But he's holding on to some hope. He says, whatever is happening, God is still good. And then Job's friends come and they sit with him in silence for a week. They're good, loyal friends. But then Job is still sad after a week. And not just sad, but even a little bit angry. And so the friends say, boy, Job, we've been sitting with you for a while, but let's turn this around. Yeah, bad things have happened, but as you said, God is good. So these bad things can only be happening to you because you are bad, because you did bad things. You probably deserved it. So figure out what you did wrong and then apologize to God, confess your sins, and then the bad things will stop happening. And Job looks over his life and he says, yeah, but I haven't. I haven't done bad things, certainly not enough to deserve this. And this conversation happens over and over again. And for some of us, this is just an interesting story. For some of us, this is real life. In our moments of testing and difficulty, these characters come into our lives. Sometimes they are friends. Sometimes they are the voices of religious people in our life. Sometimes these are even the leaders that are appointed over us. And they come and talk to us and they say, okay, listen, you deserve some of these difficulties, so let's work on that. You probably had this coming, so maybe let's turn this around and then you can kind of get back in God's good books. And those conversations are enough to push us out of community sometimes. We want more connection than that. We want more support than that. But that's all we get. But still, throughout all of this, Job is hoping and waiting for something to turn around in his life. And then behind the scenes, God and Satan continue this conversation. Finally, Satan relents, and God sees, Job has held on like I knew he would, and God rewards Job for his faithfulness. Job held on remarkably well. And this is the example for us. But we are removed from this in many ways. We don't have farms the same way that Job did. We don't have large families the way that Job did. And all of these things are different, but the connecting point is the same, that we suffer, and when we suffer, there are many things that we don't understand. In our own situations, we don't know what's happening politically. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors, the bargaining between political forces and business forces. We don't know what's happening. Are there good intentions or bad? Are there people who are trying to help us or hurt us? We don't know what's happening there. And even if we did, it wouldn't change what our obligations are in this life. We also don't know what's happening behind the scenes in people's lives. There are people who make our lives difficult, and we don't know why. Is it because their lives are difficult and they don't want anyone else to have more joy than them? Is it because they've built up some sort of distrust toward you because your story lines up with somebody else who hurt them? Is it because it's just a dog-eat-dog world and everybody has to try to one-up each other? We don't know these behind-the-scenes facts, and sometimes if we did, we'd be able to overcome them and make peace. Sometimes it wouldn't change much. We still have to work, and we still have to strengthen relationships, and we still have to build up ourselves. James also writes in verse 9, he talks about how when we are waiting, that in preparation, we have to be resilient in the sense of being kind to each other. Now, this makes sense in the context of the early church, because they were being harassed and arrested and killed because they were different. And when we see people who are different than us, it's easy and natural, even sometimes, to assume that their values are different. Because we look at them and we don't trust them, and as soon as we see anything bad coming from them, it justifies our hatred. So in some ways, what James is saying is, listen, they are watching you. They are punishing you, but they are watching you to see that you deserve it. So as soon as you start bickering amongst yourselves, as soon as you start showing hatred for other people, as soon as you start demonstrating all of the ugliness of the outside world within your own spiritual community, you will prove them right in their punishment of you. So you have to be better. You have to be kinder. You have to be more loving. That's the aspect of preparation that James is talking about. As I was thinking about this, I wanted to think about some stories of people more contemporary than biblical examples. Stories of people holding on with patient hope. And a story came to me from this year's World Cup tournament. So we have another picture I wanted to show you. The guy in the bottom left is the goalkeeper for the Canadian national team. His name is Milan Borjan. He wasn't born in Canada. He was born in the former Yugoslavia, and he migrated to Canada, fleeing the Balkans, fleeing that part of the world. And it just so happened that Canada was put in a group where they would have to play 3 games, one against Belgium, one against Morocco, and one against Croatia, which is in the same part of the world. So when Milan Borjan took to the field against Croatia, the Croatian fans there were chanting against him. Now, for the opposing fans to boo your goalie is nothing new. To yell out insults, to criticize, and to celebrate failures, that's not new. That's sports. But the criticism that many fans in particular put against the Canadian goalie were charged politically and ethnically. His family fled the country where he was born. Now, did they pack up and leave to give him better opportunities in his soccer career? Did they pack up and leave because there would be slightly higher standard of living in the new country? No, they left because people like him with the same ethnic background like him were being slaughtered and killed. When I was in Kitchener, Ontario for a while, I worked at Sport Check, and we had a Sport Check meeting. I'd worked there for a while, and guys and girls, people from various locations of Sport Check around that part of Ontario came, and we were talking about whatever. I was hardly paying attention, but it was, we were talking about how to run stores effectively and make sure stuff didn't get stolen, all that stuff. So we went around the room and we were talking about who we were and why we were excited to work at Sport Check. You wouldn't be interested either. You don't need to worry about judging me there. So I stood up. I was working part-time and saving up for going back to school, all the boring stuff. And there was a guy who stood up and he said, I come from Yugoslavia and I am working at Sport Check to save money to bring my family back from Yugoslavia. I didn't listen to anything else any of the other corporate bigwigs had to say. Nothing else was more interesting than that man's story. I was working at a store throwing cardboard boxes on shelves and putting sports jerseys on hangers. And this guy had fled because his life was in danger. You know, my reasons for working at that store were a lot less noble than his. So that is our goalkeeper's story. He came to Canada looking for safety. He found safety here, and he could play soccer. So we put him on the team. And he's a good goalie. But the fans were not just mocking his soccer abilities. He didn't play particularly well in that game. They weren't mocking anything that he did strategically. They were mocking his story. And so you can see on the banner that they hung there, it says, "Nothing runs like a deer." You recognize that slogan, that advertising John Deere. A lot of the refugees who left took tractors with them because that was the only reliable vehicle they had. And it just worked conveniently for them. So it says, nothing runs like Boreon. So they're not saying, good for you getting out of the country because your life was in danger. No, they're calling him a chicken. So after the game, the journalists do what they do, and they asked him, how did he feel? Was he angry? Was he thrown off by the fans? And he says, that's the part of the world they come from. That's their story. It's not my story anymore. I was only focusing on the field, and on the field, everybody was fantastic. The opposing players were gentlemen, and I can't let what happens in the stands determine how I play or how I feel about myself. An interesting thing happens when immigrants come to this country, is that they realize the old world hatred. Now, there's hatred in this country. I'm not going to pretend that isn't true. But the old world hatred that was so much a part of their identity that they couldn't escape in their own country. So much of that hatred is gone. I've told the story before. Same sport check. We had a guy from Northern Ireland. Exchange work arrangement had been made, and he was working in the back of the store. Winter gear had come in. We had to open the box, take things out, put them in the right shelves. We had gotten ski masks in. And he took it out, the first one out, and he looked at it astonished. A ski mask. And he says, "You guys can sell these here?" Yeah, for skiing. And I didn't understand what the issue was. And then I remembered, Northern Ireland. He's probably seen ski masks used for more nefarious purposes. Another friend, also with the same kind of Yugoslavian connection, we were going to the mall, and they had a backpack. And as we were approaching the mall, there was a guy who kind of looked like a security guard. I didn't even notice, but he looked like a security guard. So my friend walked up to the security guard and took his backpack off, ready to show the security guard that there were no weapons in his backpack. I didn't know what he was doing. And then the security guard didn't know what was going on because he wasn't a security guard. And so I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, nothing. And we went in. And he later explained where he came from. If you were carrying a bag into a mall, they were looking for explosives and guns and knives, because often they would find explosives and guns and knives. He says, "It's still weird that I don't have to do that here." So, Milan Borjan plays soccer. He's a good athlete. But he's being able to leave that old world hatred behind. The dirty, the difficult, the scary parts of his life that he couldn't escape in the country of his birth don't exist here. And again, we have other stuff to work on. But what it takes for us to sometimes escape the burdens that we are carrying is to just find ourselves in a new reality, in a new place. The other story for this morning comes from Matthew 11. And in Matthew 11, we find John the Baptist, and he's in prison, but his disciples are attending to him. They bring him food and messages, and he says to them, "Hey, guys, listen, I've told you about Jesus, and I need to know. Can you just send a message to him? Just ask if he's the one that we were waiting for." And the messengers go, and Jesus says, "Hey, tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind can see, the lame walk, and good news is preached to the poor." So the message goes back to John. John was hoping and waiting, but John was in prison. And in prison, it was difficult to feel reassured that the good things that he had told other people about were still true. Now, we are not in prison. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the freedom to come here this morning. But some of us carry a prison around. And those burdens sit on our shoulders, and I'm not saying this as as an academic outsider to this process, I carry burdens with me too. We carry burdens of other people's thoughts of who we are. We carry burdens of our failures and our inability to see beyond the failures. We carry burdens of just a resignation that things aren't going to get better. That's the prison we live in. So, maybe like John, we can send out messengers. We can talk to other people. Is it really this way? But we will hear back a message from Jesus, I believe. It doesn't have to be that way. You are not limited by the negative opinion others have of you. Your story is not determined by the failures of your past. Your capacity to love is not determined by the people who have refused to love you the way that you need and the way that you deserve. Leave that prison behind. As we journey towards Christmas, as we journey towards the celebration of the birth of the man who gave sight to the blind, who helped the lame to walk, and who preached good news to the poor, as we journey towards that birth and that celebration, may we also be reassured in our stories. May we be released from our prisons. And may we find hope that will one day be rewarded. Amen.